unlocking your world of creativity with best-selling author and brand innovator, Mark Stinson. This episode is brought to you by White Cloud Coffee Roasters, where every bean tells a story of adventure. Visit whitecloudcoffee.com and use the code CREATIVITY.
Welcome back, friends, to our podcast, Your World of Creativity. And we're continuing our around the world journeys, talking to creative practitioners everywhere about how they get inspired and how they organize ideas, and of course, how we gain the confidence and the connections to launch our work out into the world. And today I'm so happy to be talking to a poet, an educator, and author of a brand new book, The Verse for Now. Please welcome Jacqueline Suskin. Jacqueline, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I should say welcome back. We talked, over a year and a half ago almost about your book back then, A Year in Practice. And here you are with another new book. Must
Yeah,
be
I
exciting.
keep them coming. I can't stop making them.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that prolific poetry writing as we go along here. But to this extensive work, and I want to talk about the poems that you have on the Poem Store. What a great name. 9 published books, you're teaching and showing others the way. So you've got a lot going on, don't you?
I do. I'm always very busy, and it's interesting being a poet in this world. I think it unravels in a lot of different modalities, and poetry tends to show up in a lot of different places. So it leads me in many directions. My plates are very full all the time.
Yes. Let's talk about your own creative cycles. Last time we talked, you had this book, A Year in Practice, and it really emphasized the cyclical nature of creativity. And here we are coming out of winter into spring and thinking about our creativity. This book is a little bit different, maybe taking a wider, maybe almost planetary view of creativity. How have things shifted for you in this approach to your own creativity?
It's interesting. The process of bookmaking takes so long. So many of these poems were written years ago, and I actually finished this book probably around the same time as A Year in Practice. So there are some aspects of both projects that kind of weave together. The seasonal impressions are definitely still within the pages of this book. But A Year in Practice, I think, is much more of a universal creative guidance book, and it asks people to come into that space and apply those ideas to their own practice, or to look at the seasons and how they affect their own practice. And I think that the difference between that book and this book is just that this one's much more personal. It's really just about my life. But again, throughout all of my work with poetry, I noticed the lines blur with that. It's really the point of what I'm doing is to invite other people in, even if the scene that I'm describing or the images that come up or the experiences that I'm focusing on are actually just about me and my own very personal life. We see ourselves in these books. That's, for me, that's why I love the books that I love most of the time, is there's some sort of relationship that I have with the author, even if I don't know them. I think the nature of what I find personal and then my earth worship and the way that I view the planet kind of comes across in both of these books. But then in the one that is coming out now, it's just a very much more narrative kind of exploration of me coming from California and moving back to Michigan, which is where I was born.
Very good. And it's interesting you talk about these influences because on the one hand, very vast, planetary, you talk about the environment, but also from nature to urban life. And we think about nature sometimes, but we don't think about it in our literal backyards.
Yeah, I exactly. And I think that's something that's been pressing in me for a long time, is that I never wanted to be a writer who was just creating these sort of nature-based poems that exclude humans and that kind of overlook the complexity of our story and the relationship that we have with the planet. That's why I'm driven to make work as an artist, is to like really highlight those relationships. So following my journey and understanding what that is, and always having to readjust, like, how do I think about the planet and what does it mean to be an earth worshiper when we are involved in climate collapse and we're watching all these ecological ruin happen all across the world? What does it mean to be someone who loves the earth through all of that? So that's been something really interesting that I've really been trying to pick through all of my years as a writer.
Well, and We all have these moments of, what, contemplation or reflection out in nature. We sit by a creek or we're walking the city streets as we're talking about our urban environment or sitting under the old redwood in California. Yeah. Is there a personal moment for you in your creative journey where, you really connected with nature and you had this poetic inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, there have been so many, and I think even in my childhood, that when I think back to my very first memory, it's of being outside and being engaged with the natural world, and I think that so something even from a young age really pulled me to let that be my main muse, and it has continued to be my muse throughout my life, and I think exploring what that means, and I think it is true for many people. I work with a lot of young people, and they might not know immediately that they are connected to the natural world. It might not be something that they think about every day, but as soon as I ask them the question or present them with a poem that allows them to explore that in their imagination, they instantly can access it. And so I think there's something in that it maybe is this sign to me that we have this sort of innate connection and we are the earth. And that's really what this book is about. It's about taking these really complex personal narratives, weaving them in with the way that the earth affects my ability to understand myself and make decisions about my own life. And then pulls that back to this universal cosmic, maybe even just like the tension that exists between what it is to be human and to be involved in things that are destroying the planet and to be involved in things that are having us completely forget and disconnect from what it is to be alive on Earth. And so I think there's a lot of tension that I try to tease out in this book. And in a book like A Year in Practice, there are also these moments of tension that I tease out through just the simplicity of creative practice, but then I'm really talking about practice as in, like, practicing life and what it is to practice being alive and the things that we have to work on in order to exist and even be able to feel like we can make artwork, and why do we want to make it if we're in so much pain or we're suffering, and what keeps us doing that, and I think that having the earth be this sort of, like, grounding home for me, no matter where I am in the world, has been a really helpful tool, and so a lot of my work kind of steers people back to that and steers myself back to that also.
So good. Maybe this is a good time to share an excerpt or one of the poems from the book.
I'd love to, yeah, I have one here that I feel is applicable to a lot of people are feeling right now, and it's called Time. We are gone in ourselves. One second we try and avoid knocking down the spider's web, only to walk right through it a minute later, unnoticed. We are cut like the melon, made of mush, drowning in the sweet, thick summer stick of the mind that keeps churning. The plants never stop singing directions. But oh, the distance from hearing to listening is measured like fermentation. The need of the dark, cold waiting, added spice, and suddenly the bubbling mess of delight comes into perfection for us to taste. We worked for it, with it and against it. We bite down on the rolling swell of our limitlessness and cry. I think again on how long it took us to see the truth. And I know it'll all burn up before we can apply the lesson. But some magic lingers. Something good carries on like a braid full of seeds buried deep in the darkest dirt.
Very good. That was Jacqueline Suskin reading from her new book, The Verse for Now. It really raises an interesting question about you were talking about the weight of these issues. These are heady times, and especially when we think about our environment. And yet we want to find the sort of in the moment creative inspiration from it. How do you find balance in those two things?
I think there's this constant grief that we go through just being alive. And no matter who I'm talking about, any person, just being alive is just so full of loss and grief. And so I do think we're always looking for a reminder of what is the reason why we do this? Like, why do we keep ourselves going. And I think artwork is often there to answer that. It's a supplemental inspiration. It's a reminder for us that there is beauty in the world. There's another poem in the book that's called Beauty Over and Over, and it talks about why do we make artwork? It's to remind each other why life is worth living. And so I think that the desire to pull creativity from these times and put it on the page or turn it into whatever medium suits you is the desire to share that mutual yearning to stay in it and to stay here together. And how do we do it? And what does it look like? And how can we re envision it? And I think throughout history, that has come again and again, this connection between who we are, why we do what we do, and how we're all in it together. And when I see a poem on the page telling me something that resonates, it's this sense of, oh, I'm not in this alone. I'm not the only one feeling the hard side of this, but I'm also not the only one noticing the beauty. And so there's this permission that exists in that. And I think as artists, we're constantly giving each other that permission. We're holding space for each other or even just for ourselves. A lot of artists don't think beyond the self. And I think that's totally fine. I think it's actually just a choice that we make. Are we people who are reaching as far as we can with our artwork, or are we just finding our own relief in it? And I think all of that is extremely worthy because it does keep us going. And it, as someone who really does feel a lot of grief about what's happening to our planet, I feel this sense of I want to be involved in this urgent movement for justice and for relief and for change. And at the same time, I recognize that all of that happens only through other people. And so if I want that to happen, I have to risk and give all of my energy and push to create things that might inspire something like that. And that's how I know how to do it. But maybe someone else would read a poem or write a poem and it would unfurl in a completely different way and cause someone else to feel something new. And then that vision gets to take hold and something else starts growing. So I think that's really what everyone is doing on some level when they make artwork, even if it's just for them.
And open to the interpretation of the reader or the viewer. Yes.
Yeah.
But you're bringing up some interesting points about the craftsmanship, especially of poetry, that I wanted to explore a little bit with you. I've read about your portfolio of improvisational poems, which have this sort of off the cuff, in the moment feel to them. And yet there's an intentional writing, sit down part of any writing, but especially poetry. How do you find the role of each one of those? Just write what you feel and get it on the page versus we're really working on this. We're going to go through lots of iterations and then, of course, ultimately edit it into a book. But how do you find the balance? Or I guess maybe how does each contribute to your creative process?
Well, I do think that I feel very lucky to have had such a long experience writing poems for people in public with my project Poem Store. And those spontaneous poems allowed me to have a very direct and quick connection and conversation with another person. So I do think something about the speed of creative response is like, first of all, it's very freeing to create that way. So I highly recommend it because it's allowing you to maybe even tap into your subconscious and not think too much about the outcome, but just let yourself feel through the language. And it's really fun. And it's also, I do think it illuminates certain things like when I would see words or concepts appear with repetition, I would just know, oh, this is a really important thing to me. This keeps coming up. If I'm only going to write one poem, then I would definitely use this word in it. And so I would just notice these patterns. And that's, I think, very enlightening for a writer to pick up on their own patterns and see the things that move them most. And I think spontaneity is a cool way to access that. But other than that project allowing me to have so many connections with people and explore poetry in a completely different way, I think the other side of the coin is being a trained poet and having this professional side of things where I am tucked away in my own space. That kind of allows me to dig into language in a completely different way, where I get to spend such time caring for each line break and each word and revising and learning the craft of editing over these years has been actually something that I had no idea I would adore the editing process as deeply as I do now. And even in the last 5 or 6 years, I've become an editor, and now I do that work for other people, and I can't get enough of it because I think the best way to talk about it in this setting is these different levels of the muse. And I think in spontaneity and improvisation, the muse of creativity lands to give you the idea, and you respond immediately and try to get that down on the page. But then there's this other muse, the editing muse, who comes along and is, okay, so now how can we craft that first initial spark into something that more people can access, right? Because I'm creating this improvisational poem that really is just for me and this other person. They keep the copy of the poem. I'm writing on my typewriter in a
Mhm.
public place, and it's very specific for them, and that's the point of it. Even if there are many universal tones in it, because there probably would be, as we're all human, and that's the whole point, is that I'm a human too, so I can hear what they're going through and write for them because we're all on this trip together. But then when I'm home alone and crafting so carefully, I can expand that even further and
Mhm.
try to find the words and the rhythms and the cadence that would invite in as many people as possible. And I decided long ago that was what I was doing as a writer. I was trying to invite in as many people as possible. And I don't think that's what you have to do with poetry. I actually think often poetry can be very esoteric and strange, and it can live on the page in a way that is not an invitation and it's not very welcoming, but it's still really interesting and can be captivating in an esoteric, weird way. But then I think mixing that with this more welcoming spirit makes a lot of sense for me. So in the space of editing, I get to do that and really contemplate, like, how is this word going to land with, let's say, my mother? Or how is this word going to invite in my neighbor? And like thinking of it in that way.
Yeah. I love the way you describe it as two different kinds of muses.
Mm.
It really makes sense. Extending that thought, we love to learn from the methods of other creatives. Do you have a ritual? Do you have a time frame? Do you have a schedule? Do you have anything that you find works for you? Some people say, I have to get up first thing and write so many words or do this before noon or yes, so
Yeah,
forth. Do you have that
I
kind of
love
rhythm?
the ritual of it. I do, and I also love to hear about other writers' rituals.
Right.
I think it's so interesting. I always talk about this in a sense where I have a practice that I do every day, no matter what's happening in my life, and writing isn't always a part of that. It's very much more grounded in a spiritual meditation practice that keeps my mind, I like to say, in a poetic state. But I think that when I am really talking about the ritual of writing, it depends on whatever project I'm working on. Like if I'm working on a book and I have a book that's in form, that's coming to be, I can see maybe like right now on my desktop, I have a folder of about 30 very unfinished poems that I would love to attend to and add to, but I'm not in that mindset right now. Like right now, I'm promoting and about
Mhm.
to birth a book into the world. So my mindset is very much, how can I express as much as possible about the importance of how that feels? And that's not necessarily something that goes onto the page every day. I will write in my journal during these times, and I will give myself, whenever I feel like I have an idea, I turn to the page. But if I'm invested and I know that a book is coming, I'll write every day. I'll write in the wee hours of the morning. I'll wake up in the middle of the night with an idea and run up to my desk and start writing. I think there's something in that that I always come back to, which is that I have accepted my role as a writer in this lifetime so that when an idea comes to me, I never turn away from it. But then in that same breath, I remember I heard some interview with Tom Waits a long time ago where he was like, telling the muse, "Don't come to me now while I'm driving on the interstate. It's not a good time." And
Right.
sometimes I think that's what my rhythm looks like. The ritual of sort of understanding at this point, 9 books in, that the muse has a lot to offer me, and I'm very tuned in apparently. And I also can say, "Hey, I'm overwhelmed right now with being on a podcast or doing all this promotional work, and maybe now is not the best time for a poem." But I actually feel very much like I have a hard time turning away from that. So I have little notebooks all around my house and in my car, and I'm always putting a note down for later. And I do get back to those things. And I have a ritual around that also, which is that this yearly return to my notes for myself happens only in kind of a retreat time where nothing else is bothering me. Nothing else is, I'm not being asked to do anything but collect all of my ideas and then expand on them. And I think that having that sort of rhythm goes back to the year in practice book, which is this sense of cyclically, seasonally, how am I personally affected? And when is the best time of year for me to do my retreat? And when is the best time of year for me to just let the page be blank for a bit and take a break? And I do think that there's a lot of built-in boundaries that I've created for myself based on my own patterns. And that's always what I suggest that people do is take some time to like carefully look at when are you energized to do that? Because sometimes sitting down and staring at a blank page is not actually like the generative thing you need to do. Maybe you need to go on a walk. Mary Oliver took her little notebook on all of her walks, and that's where most of her poems came from. So having a notebook on a walk might be your thing. And I think like really looking into any little tricks of the trade that have worked for other poets that I love, I follow suit. And that's one of them. Like I always have a notebook with me no matter what. Even if I'm not in the writing mood, I'm just glad it's there.
Yes. I think so many of us can relate to that. And listeners, if you're nodding now going, I have those scraps of paper. I have those napkins. I have those things in my glove compartment. I have a folder with 30 unfinished pieces. Yes, we can all relate for sure. Thanks for sharing that. I want to explore some of your teaching efforts, but maybe before I do, this is a good time, one, to read another excerpt if you have another poem, but two, where can we find more about the book and learn how we can connect with you in the work?
The book is being published by Flower Press, which is a small publisher here in Detroit. I really wanted to try something new with this book, and exploring what it's like to work with an independent small publisher in the place where I live felt important to me, like an experiment and just to see what would happen. So you can buy the book through Flower Press. They have a lot of other amazing things that they make. And I think that it'll be interesting to see the progression of how that all works. And I do think the publishing industry is changing a lot. So maybe turning towards smaller presses will make more sense in the future for other people also.
Very good.
I think I'll read this poem. It's called Hello Spring, just because we're greeting the season. I'll be ripped into the story of Earth now, because the season is changing and I can no longer sleep through it all. I now have no winter excuse to tuck myself in for too many hours, because the grass, the green, the flowers, the severe messages of bugs and birds quiver against each bud about to pop. Kneeling in the mud, I'm urged to yell like color, but the courage of silence wraps around me. I listen, dig, and clip, soothe myself like a dog, and climb only one limb of the apple tree because there's no need to break the crown with my weight. I'm waiting, like all living things, to go back under, to rediscover the darkness, to say goodbye again to sun.
Very nice. Thanks for that.
That poem, that
So
poem
good.
it explores the tension, I think, of spring.
Yes.
Spring is a kind of a rough moment for me usually. Once it takes hold, it's great. It's glorious. But at the beginning, it's so much exposure. It's so much tension. It's hard.
Yes. Like any anticipation, perhaps. Yes. As we said, I wanted to talk a little bit about teaching and Inside Out Literary Arts. You've got a great course called Poem Forest Curriculum. How does this idea of engaging with communities, with younger creators, students, influence your work? It obviously teaches them the craft, but I'm sure it comes back to you as well.
Yeah, and I spoke earlier of just there's all these different levels, I think, of choices we make as an artist. And one of my choices that I made long ago was that I really wanted to be a writer who was accessible to as many people as possible. And in that is tied being involved and engaged in community and making work for other people, but then also that over the years very easily turned into helping other people make work. And I think working with students is this way that I feel I have a tie to kind of the real pulse of what's happening in the world. And these children are the future. And if they're not thinking about the planet and they don't have access to talk about their feelings about what's happening with the climate, and if they don't have agency, then I don't really understand how the future will form in a healthier, beneficial way with the natural world as a focus or as a companion. So I think getting in there early makes sense to me. But then also, Inside Out Literary Arts is a 30-year-old program here in Detroit, and it is established, and they know what they're doing. And what they're doing is they're giving kids agency, like I just said. And I think letting there be space in the poetry canon for young voices is something that feels expansive in this way that it's inclusive, and it's allowing us to see these people who will be the future of planet Earth already have amazing ideas. And I really have gotten so much out of having the ability to have access to them and the classrooms. I think they inspire me like constantly with their work. And I'm always amazed, what is rooted deep inside of them, and they just need 20 minutes to get it out on the page, and it's already there. And that was how I was when I was a kid. So I think there's another thing in it that's very healing for me to be able to be like, when I was a child, I was already a poet. And so I know that they're there, they exist. There are poets in every classroom in Detroit. So I'm excited that I get the chance to allow them the space and time to get that out. And I think with Poem Forest, this curriculum is just it's an example of what it looks like to make space for that agency in the world of climate justice and let these students speak for themselves and say, this is what we're afraid of. This is what we want to see. This is what's important to us. And maybe like allowing them to try to solve problems or help each other through it or just carry each other's grief and not have to hold it all in. It feels really special to be able to nurture that. And I think I've never been a poet who wants to just tuck myself away and be away from all the people. I think I've always been trying to find different ways to just be part of the world and be in communication with everyone around me and people who are very different than me, because I think there's this sense of what happens in that with our curiosity and our creativity when we're engaging with people every day who are strangers and people who we wouldn't normally know. And my whole career has been built around that with Poem Store and now Poem Forest also, of just being able to invite other people into the practice and the process and having it be a more shared experience. To me, that just feels right. And I feel very blessed that I even get to explore what that looks like in action.
So good. Now let's think about how to put that into practice. These are great principles. And I think a lot of us want to take our own experiences and share them. What message, or I'll say advice, but practical guidance would you share with some of our listeners who really seek to nurture their creativity, but also then find connection?
I do think that it might sound simplistic, but I think that in this moment, it is incredibly important to find an organization in your community that's already established and exists and that can hold space for what you're trying to offer. And I'm really adamant that already exists. And there are people out there who have been doing this work for decades, who have built these platforms and these nonprofits and these community organizations. And I think that we have a big disconnect from that in a lot of ways. Like, it might seem like it's out of our reach or it's not for us. But I do think engaging with already existing arts community forces is really important. I think for every artist to try to figure that out. And even if you're not someone who is extremely outgoing with your artwork, or if you're not someone who is like already established in community connection, then that's even more a reason to find the loop that you can exist in. And how can you be with other people who are already doing what you want to be doing? And I think like really the search for that might seem difficult, but I feel that most communities have these, like a bookstore who hosts a book club every month, and engaging with other people who care about what you care about, allowing yourself to not necessarily make art with other people, but maybe just talk about art with other people or share your art with other people. That's the third muse that I think exists in the timeline of the muses, is the sharing muse, the muse that inspires you to bring your work to your community. And I think there are all these unique ways that we can do that. And maybe we've been taught that it should only look a certain way. If you're a successful or connected artist, then you have work in a gallery or have a book published by a big time publisher, or whatever the list goes on of these sort of pre-assumed constructs. And I am really into what's the subculture in your community, or what's a group that already exists that is putting poets in the schools, like Inside Out. There are all these amazing organizations, and I don't want to romance that and act like it's just, of course, well, just go be part of your community. But part of me does think, if you're longing for that kind of action, then seek the folks who are already acting, and they will want you to act with them. That they don't want to act alone. They want, camaraderie, and most of us do.
Yes. That's a good call to action, or even call to sharing, call to connect. Very good. Jacqueline Suskin has been my guest. Jacqueline, what a terrific time we've had discussing just your creativity in general, your creative spirit. I love it. And the journey now with the new book, The Verse for Now. So exciting.
Thank you so much.
And this idea that you like to connect and maybe read the work differently with, if you know the writer, I feel the same way. And so as you're out there doing your readings and your book talks, I'm sure someone will connect with you and find some good creative inspiration.
Thank you.
Yes. And you can go to Flower Press and read more about the book at JacquelineSuskin.com to find out more about Jacqueline and her work. And thanks again to our sponsor, White Cloud Coffee Roasters. Listeners, you can enjoy a 10% discount for your order when you use the code CREATIVITY at checkout. Go to whitecloudcoffee.com for more details. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe and rate and review Your World of Creativity on your favorite podcast platform. Your support keeps us having these inspiring conversations and make sure that we're connecting with you. We love it. And come back again for our next episode. We'll continue our around the world journeys. We've stamped our creative passport in Detroit, Michigan today, but we'll continue finding creators everywhere to unlock your world of creativity. Until then, I'm Mark Stinson, and we'll see you next time.